There's a lot more thinking than maybe I was expecting there to be.
There's a definite kind of sandbox feel of like you learn to make your own mistakes. Hi, my name's Tom.
Hi, my name's James.
I'm a Band 1 route setting assistant at the depot.
I'm a level 1 route setter at Depot Manchester.
I'm also an academy coach and a wall assistant.
Yeah, so I work with the academy and I do like one-on-one and two-on-one sessions with adults, as well as like the standard sort of NIBAS and NICAS sessions too.
When did you start climbing?
So I started climbing when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
So I've been climbing since I was a kid. My dad was a climber, so got into it at a very young age, but quite intermittently, never really got a chance to get into it in my own right until I went to university.
What is it you like about climbing?
Well, climbing for me is, I mean, obviously it's a sport, like, I'm going to state the obvious. It keeps you active, keeps you healthy, but I think it's both like mentally and emotionally very good for you.
I think my favourite part of climbing is the problem-solving aspect of it, and how that's paired with physical effort as well, and how if you try and just use one without the other, often it doesn't work. And finding that nuance in climbs, but also knowing when to try hard and when to relax is something that's really satisfying for me.
I think you learn to fail quite a lot, and you learn how to deal with not being able to do things, which I think at some points in life can be quite a hard lesson.
What is it that motivated you to get into route setting?
I think because the problem-solving aspect is so exciting for me when I'm climbing, I think having a creative outlet for sort of creating my own problems and sort of challenging myself and other people as well has always been something that I wanted to do. So when I got the opportunity here, it was really exciting to be able to jump into it.
I think working in climbing and working close to climbing, I think you start to reassess your own approach to climbing. And you start to kind of think a lot more carefully and a lot more closely about what you're actually doing when you're on the wall. And I think from there, it's kind of a natural leap to finding the idea of route setting interesting, finding the idea of how you kind of approach your own problem, or rather you approach a problem and then how you make it your own is also kind of very appealing.
When was it that you started route setting?
So I started route setting just over a year ago. So end of August 2023, start of September. So I'd been at the depot for a year by that point.
So I started route setting in December last year, so it's been 10 months.
What surprised you about route setting?
I think when you're an in-house setter, one of the biggest surprises or one of the biggest challenges, I think, is being constantly exposed to your own work.
One of the things that I really enjoy about route setting here, it seems a lot more of a team activity than I was expecting it to. Like when you set your own boulder, I was expecting it to just be like, you set this thing, it is yours, you test it, you tweak it, you make it work. But there's a lot of teamwork here, which is something that I really enjoy. Like everyone will come over and give you advice on what needs to change on your boulder to make it work. And sometimes that can be quite a frustrating experience, like you're trying to almost argue your point on why you think this is a good move to do, or why you think it is a certain grade or worthwhile. And if the team disagrees with that, there's a certain amount of like back and forth and sort of arguing for your point that you need to do.
You have a day setting, I come into work the next day and I'm like, my blocks, they're still here. And I think learning to deal with the fact that you are suggesting ways that these holds can be climbed, you are doing your best to make your suggestion the best way they can be climbed. You leave that on the wall and thousands of other people are gonna reinterpret what you've done, and hopefully you've done it well, or you've done something that makes sense to be done in one way. But you're always gonna set things. Yes, such a banger, great sequence, and then someone's just gonna come up and like span it, or like pull on a foothold, or just like some crazy thing.
But overall, I think it's super useful because a lot of the people here have got more experience than I do. So if there's something that I'm struggling with and I can't figure out why a move's not working, I can always just go to one of those guys and just be like, hey, could you give me a hand with this? I'm struggling to make this work. What do you think needs to change? And having just a second pair of eyes on the boulder problem is always useful.
There's always going to be something that someone's going to do, I'm going to have to like learn from that and be like, so why has that felt better for them? And why is it not the way you wanted it?
I find it can be so easy to get drawn into the move that you want to set and really hard to spot what move people are actually going to do. So you set a climb, it's got this perfect sequence that you had in mind, and then the first person to get on it just completely obliterates that sequence. It's like, how did I, like, obviously they're just going to put a heel hook there. That's such an obvious thing to do, but because you have this idea in your head of like, this is the move that I want, it's really hard to see what people are actually going to do. So having a second set of eyes or like a team around you that's able to just say, someone's going to put a heel hook there, because they don't have that bias of like it being their problem and they don't know what you want, it's really, really useful.
How has the pathway helped you get into route setting?
I think getting into route setting can be quite difficult because there's not really a definite way for people to do it.
So I probably wouldn't have got into route setting if it weren't for the depot pathway. It was not something that had crossed my mind as a climber. Obviously, when I applied for a job at the depot, it would be fun to get into setting, and you think that.
Like it seems like something that a lot of climbers want to get into, but knowing where to start can be quite difficult. For me, it started with stripping here. So I always used to work the morning shifts, and part of that responsibility is stripping the holds before they're set. So for a solid 2 years, I was stripping once or twice a week.
In order to start route setting at our centre, it's essential that you have done some stripping shifts. So you have experience with a driver and you can use a ladder, because being able to quickly get screws in and out and bolts in and out is kind of an essential stepping stone.
But also working the morning shifts where they were doing the setting as well, so I was getting to know the setters and getting to know sort of ladder work and drill work and developing a little bit of route setting skills before I'd even put a single climb on the wall, which I think was super useful for me because it meant that when I started setting, the barrier to entry was a lot lower. Like I didn't have to learn everything all at once.
Showing that you're capable of learning as well, I think is really important. Every 6 months or so we have a one-to-one like chat with the head setter where you kind of assess how you've been doing, what you're kind of doing well at, what you're maybe doing not so well at, what you're kind of looking to improve on, and like what your kind of objectives are. So just being very clear and very communicative about like what you can do and what you can't do and how you can bridge that gap.
I think sometimes people struggle with it being quite overwhelming when they start, because like you don't know. Ladder work is something that seems really simple and straightforward, but there's a lot more nuance to it than you maybe think there is, like on the way that you place it and then using a drill and lugging big holds up a ladder and placing them with one hand while you're trying to drill them in. It's like if you've got a little bit of experience stripping and doing all that stuff before you've set a climb, it just takes a little bit of the stress out of it when you first start setting. So that was really useful for me, just developing some of those skills before I'd started. So I luckily got the opportunity to start setting here and was able to then use the skills that I developed stripping on top of developing some new ones setting. So
What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone trying to get into route setting?
it was really surprising to me that ideas made things harder a lot of the time.
Probably climb as many different things as you can. Try and pay attention to how you're climbing them. That might be like things below your level, whatever, it might be things above your level. Just try and think about how you climb and try and compare that to how other people climb.
Sometimes you just have to let go of like this climb that you want to set and have a look at what holds you have and have a look at the space you've got and let that kind of influence the idea and the climb that happens. I think the most frustrating days that I've had setting have always been when I had an idea that I wanted to set going through the day, and then the holds end up just being a little bit wrong and the wall angle ends up being a little bit wrong, and you fight for your life to try and make this climb work, and it was just never going to happen. And if you just let the holds and the wall come up with the idea themselves almost, you often come up with a lot more pleasant ideas that just kind of work a lot faster.